Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I'll be talking about Dawnshard, the novella by Sanderson that comes between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. Now note that I'm going to start by just talking about Dawnshard in general, the base plot, my thoughts on it in a general non-spoiler fashion, and then in the second half of this video I will be discussing with some spoilers as well. I'll make sure to note before I get into the spoilers, and as always I'll have the timestamp of where you can skip to get past the spoiler section. So Dawnshard's base plot is with Risen, who is going to be going on a mission to the lost city of Akana, which is part of Amia, and she is being sent there in part by Queen Navani of Urthuru, of course, because they want to find out if the Oathgate there is still functioning, as having an Oathgate that's an unknown, really not a good thing, as especially since we had issues where Taravangian had betrayed everyone and let troops through the Oathgate into Urthuru before. They want to make sure nothing like that happens again, and so that's where we have our Urthuru group wanting somebody to go there. We saw, of course, previously a ship that had tried to go to the same island to find the treasure that was rumored to be there was stopped as the Sleepless guard Akana, so the trip there has lots of things that potentially could go wrong, and arriving could be even more dangerous. We follow Risen, who is still bound to a chair, and later kind of wheelchair and then figural wheelchair after her legs were permanently injured on the Reshi Isles when she had jumped in for that trade deal we saw in a previous interlude. And she also wants to go there because Chiri, her Larkin, who originally came from that island, is sick, and she thinks the only way to potentially save Chiri is to go there. So she's going. We have a couple of Radiants going as well, including Lopin and Huyo, which I don't know if I'm actually saying that right. Huyo, I don't know. Close enough. And we also have Cord, Rock's daughter, attending as well. So there are some things that happen in this that do play into Rhythm of War. Once again, you don't have to actually read Dawnshard before you read Rhythm of War, but I found myself wishing I would have, so it's something that I recommend doing if you can. If you haven't read either yet, you might as well read Dawnshard first. But the things that happen in Dawnshard are more likely going to have a bigger impact later, but we do get to see some cool things actually happen in this book. That's kind of a synopsis of what's going on with the book. So with that, I'm going to jump into a little bit more specific details and spoilers. So at this point, if you don't want to see the spoilers, check the description, and I will have a timestamp of where you can skip to get to the end of the video where I'll kind of summarize and recap and review. But with that, I'm going to jump into the spoiler section. So we see the trip on the way to Akana, and one of the Sleepless is pretending to be her porter and is trying to do everything he can do to get them to just stop and turn back. This starts to get really desperate when they are getting really close and still have refused. They actually get through the storm, and him and the other Sleepless are planning to just take over the ship and kill literally all of them rather than let them find the secret. They reach the island, they see just these gem hearts everywhere, and they end up being decoys, and some start finding as well. The scholar who went, Rushu as well, who was there, they figure out that there's a fake city built on top of the real city, all to hide the secret. We get Risen and Cord, who end up jumping into the water, and led by Chiri finds an underground cavern where the real secret is, and that's where we get the titular Dawnshard. This was such a big thing even in a smaller story, because we find out the Dawnshards, which we've heard references to before. I always assumed it was something that was just specific to Roshar. I did not have any idea that this was actually a full-on Cosmere thing. We find out the Dawnshards are, there's 4 of them, and they're kind of this like basic will of a command that essentially are part of the creation of the Cosmere and are directly at Analcium. And these, it sounds like, were actually used to destroy and shatter at Analcium, starting the Cosmere and the Shards as we even know it. So an immense amount of power, and Risen ends up basically taking it inside of her to inhabit, and then has to negotiate with the Sleepless to let her and anyone else leave alive. So the Cosmere impact here is once again very, very large, because what will having one of the Dawnshards inside of her, one of these commands, what will that do? And could eventually this have to do with the very, very end of the Cosmere arcs is another big piece of it. So we don't still know a ton, but we learn so much right there where there's the 4 Dawnshards, and then they're broken from there further into another 4 of the shards, and so all of this kind of makes up the 1. So confirms, which we already kind of knew, that there are more shards that we don't know about, potentially on worlds we haven't seen or worlds we have, but also confirms that they're also paired into groups of 4, which I'm not going to lie, I totally was like looking at a shard list and trying to figure out where they went. I didn't quite figure it out, but it just reveals quite a lot going on. So really, really impactful novella, even though it's a shorter story on its own. We also did get to see Lopen POVs, which of course, who wouldn't want a Lopen POV? But we saw the fact that Lopen and his cousin are actually a lot more intelligent than you would be led to think. And that's kind of the thing with Lopen. And really, we see him kind of growing as a person. And he has probably the silliest, but still meaningful oath as a Knight Radiant, where he swears his third ideal after his cousin does. And for him, instead of protecting those that he hates, it's protecting others from himself, because he kind of realizes, gets this moment of self-awareness that he's not exactly always the nicest to people, and sometimes people really don't like all the different things he says, and so it was kind of a silly thing, but getting to see those point of views was enjoyable as well. So those were kind of the smaller scale things. Of course, Cord found the shard plate that we see her with in Rhythm of War here as well, but the big thing still is the Dawnshards and the impact that will have on the Cosmere as a whole. Okay, so I realized when editing that I forgot one big thing that I did want to talk about, which is the relationship between the so-called Lux Friend and Great Shells. This is something that's actually been mentioned almost since the very first book, so I think there's a lot more that's going to come up with it later, but we've seen how these Lux Friend fly with sky eels, they're around the Santhid, they're around the Chasm Fiends, and we find out that Chiri Chiri needs to actually travel to Akanaw specifically and to create a bond with one of these Spren that's actually from this area, and will have to do so several times as Chiri Chiri continues to grow, because it will get too big to be able to support its own weight, and these Spren grant the ability essentially to kind of like be lighter, or like in anti-gravitation, almost like lashing with a surge. So it really plays more into the idea that Spren don't just bond humans and or listeners / singers, but also with animals. And we know, we've heard many times throughout the series, that many animals have gem hearts as well. So once again, just gives us a bigger glimpse into before humans, when there seemed to have been more kind of this harmony between the Spren and their bond with the gem hearts of both the listeners, there were the ancient dawn singers, and also the animals. And so I think that's something that's really going to be explored even more. It's just simply been brought up too many times for it to not be important at this point. So I think it'll be really interesting with, once we start to dig into that deeper, hopefully something in book 5, maybe we'll find out some more. But I definitely wanted to mention it because it is simply just something that it has to be important at this point. I don't think we'd keep having references to it in each of the first 4 books and then in Dawnshard as well if it wasn't important in some way. Overall, I did really find this story very enjoyable. Like I said, I liked Rizen's interludes a lot, and I thought that was an interesting character, so I liked getting to explore. And I also really like the fact that this is a character who's becoming a little bit more important, who's not a Radiant. We have so many characters that, by them being main characters, it's almost like, oh, they're going to bond a Spren and be a Radiant. And having a character who's not, and especially a character who has a physical defect, and is knowing that, you know, if I could just bond a Spren, I'd be healed, it's not the easy way taken here. And so I liked having a different character to follow, a little bit more of a human character. There was a character I mentioned in my video about Rhythm of War that I really liked, that we see that too. So it's an interesting take. It was an interesting story where we got to take a look at some of these side characters in a little bit more detail. And overall, I thought it was a great read. It's also very quick. It's only about 200 pages, and it's only available right now on electronic format, so I feel like that's an even quicker read than if it was a physical book. So definitely, if you have not read Dawnshard, go out and read it. As I mentioned before, I would recommend reading it before Rhythm of War. You don't have to, if you're already reading Rhythm of War, but if you're not, it's only 200 pages. It's, a fraction of the size of Rhythm of War. Knock it out first. It'll just make things fit a little bit more, and it also sets the stage for how big Rhythm of War is going to get, so I think that works as well. So I know that was a little bit brief, but those are my thoughts on Dawnshard. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I would definitely love to hear what you thought of this, if you agree or disagree with some of the things that I said. If you liked this video, then feel free to give it a like, and if you want to see more of my content, then feel free to subscribe.